Joining me now is Daniel Pomerantz. He's a journalist joining us live to talk to us further about normalisation post-COVID in the country. Good afternoon, Daniel. Thanks for joining NewsHour.
Thank you for having me.
Now, is it fair to say that Israel is a post-COVID country?
Well, we don't look at it that way, and I think that's part of the reason for our success. To beat COVID, you really need three things. One is you need to have physical access to vaccines, which isn't always easy. The next is you need to distribute them and get them out to people quickly, which is a major logistical challenge, and Israel had some creative solutions for that, including hospital tents that were set up in public places. And finally, the third thing you need to do is open slowly, gradually, and carefully. And at every step, every time you reduce a restriction on life, you have to check the data, make sure it's working, and be prepared to take a step back if you have to. We've had so many lockdowns followed by openings, followed by locking down again for second wave and third wave, that we've gotten used to the idea that we don't look at life as normal yet. We look at ourselves as being on a path that is continuing and will probably slowly continue toward normal for a very long time.
Okay, well, I think that sounds good enough at this stage. But the outdoor mask mandate has been lifted in the country. How can you evaluate Israel's fight against the virus at this stage?
Yeah, lifting the outdoor mask is a significant moment. Walking around without a mask outside, we feel almost strange because we haven't done that in almost a year. And it does give people a real sign of returning to normal life. But of course, as I said, the next important step is checking the statistics. And as you know, Israel's been sharing its data with Pfizer and with the whole world in what effectively amounts to a massive stage 4 trial, which is where you check data after a vaccine has been rolled out to the general population. And we're very proud that we get to share this data with the world and that it gets to help people. And what the data has shown so far is that even without the outdoor masks, our numbers for infections on a daily rate have gotten to the lowest levels they've been at since the pandemic began, which means that we're probably looking at further easing of restrictions to come. So it's looking good so far.
Israel's the world leader in vaccinating its population against COVID-19. Do you think that Israel can be a role model for other countries, especially with rising cases at the moment and deaths?
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's very important to have a role model like Israel for modern Western democracies, because, a country that can impose martial law or is run by a dictator, they can just close down everything and no one can object. Well, obviously, most modern Western countries cannot do that. Another aspect is there may be some countries like New Zealand who have a population of people that aren't traveling around the world quite as much as Israel. Everybody has families in different countries, much like New York, where people have families and friends everywhere. And so New York and Israel and Turkey cannot, and the UK cannot shut down quite so completely in the way that a country like New Zealand can. So you need to look for countries that are similar. And Israel provides a role model for democracy where people have needs and interests and objections. People can lobby the government, and the government has to balance everybody's interests together. And some of those interests include a lot of travel and business. And it hasn't always been easy. There have been a lot of disagreements. There have been moments where Israel's numbers got worse before they got better, precisely because we're a democracy filled with people who argue. And yet we managed to balance all those interests and find a way forward. And I think that's very positive and also something the world can learn. One of the greatest tools we have right now, which, by the way, is a topic of debate and argument, is called the Green Passport. If you've been vaccinated, you can go to restaurants and certain other venues that you can't go into if you're not vaccinated. Now, some people argue, well, I have a right to not get vaccinated, and you shouldn't be able to stop me from traveling and going to a restaurant. On the other hand, everyone has a right to not get infected and live in a safe environment. So Israel's efforts to balance the different rights of people is really a lesson in how to balance human rights, that the whole world can now look to Israel to see not only how to deal with the pandemic, but how to deal with the human rights issues that come afterwards.
Sure. Okay, now a leading Israeli doctor believes the country may be close to reaching herd immunity due to the aggressive vaccination plan, yet others reject this, saying that it's not close to herd immunity at all, and they're very concerned about the rising Indian variant of the coronavirus. So can you take us through the latest developments there?
Well, the world certainly isn't nearing herd immunity. Herd immunity is based on evaluating a number called the R0 figure, which it's not entirely clear what the R0 is under different conditions. When you're in lockdown, it's one number. When you're not in lockdown, it's another number. So it's a very complex analysis to do. What we've been doing is we've decided, well, it doesn't matter if we have herd immunity or not. We release restrictions, check the numbers. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we take a step back. In terms of the variants, so far, what we found, there does not seem to be any variant that has escaped the vaccine or that has escaped the immunity that comes from having had the virus in the past. I know that is a concern around the world, that there's this double mutation in India, but so far all the data that we've seen, both from Israel and from around the world, is that the vaccines still work with all the variants that currently exist.
Okay, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.